Inside Angola's death row. In a remote stretch of farmland in West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana, there is a prison so large it occupies 18,000 acres, larger than many American towns. Inside this massive compound sits one of the most infamous prison units in the United States. A place where men sentenced to die wait, sometimes for decades, for the state to decide their fate. This is death row at Louisiana State Penitentiary, commonly known simply as Angola. For the men held here, time moves differently. Days blur into months. Months turn into years. And sometimes, years stretch into multiple decades. Some prisoners die of natural causes before their execution date ever arrives. Others continue to appeal their cases for decades. And a few have even walked out of Angola after courts overturned their convictions. This is the story of what life is actually like inside Angola's death row. Based entirely on documented records, court filings, investigative reporting, and first-hand accounts from corrections officials and prisoners. What does daily life look like? How long do prisoners wait for execution? And what really happens inside one of America's most isolated death row units? Before we go further, take a moment to support the channel. If you find documentaries like this valuable, like the video and subscribe to the Inmate Diaries. Your support helps us continue producing deeply researched prison documentaries and sharing stories that are rarely seen by the public. Now, let's step inside Angola. The prison built on a plantation. The history of Angola prison begins long before it became a prison. The land itself was once part of several antebellum plantations located along the Mississippi River. In the early 1800s, enslaved Africans were forced to work these fields, producing cotton and other crops. One of the plantations was called Angola Plantation. The name came from the country of origin of many enslaved people brought to the area, Angola in West Africa. After the Civil War ended slavery in 1865, Louisiana began leasing prisoners to private businesses through a system known as convict leasing. Under this system, prisoners were forced to work on plantations under brutal conditions. Historical research shows that death rates among leased prisoners were extremely high. By the late 1800s, Louisiana decided to create a permanent state prison. In 1901, the state purchased 8,000 acres of the former plantation land and officially established the prison that would become Angola. Over time, the facility expanded dramatically. Today, the prison covers approximately 18,000 acres, making it the largest maximum security prison in the United States. The size and structure of Angola. Unlike most prisons, Angola operates more like a self-contained community. The prison contains multiple housing units, industrial workshops, agricultural fields, a fire station, a hospital, a rodeo arena, staff housing. Thousands of inmates live and work inside the complex. As of recent publicly available data, Angola houses more than 5,000 prisoners, many serving life sentences without parole. Louisiana has one of the highest rates of life imprisonment in the United States. In fact, Angola has sometimes been referred to by researchers and journalists as the prison where most inmates will die. This reputation comes from the large number of inmates serving life sentences with no possibility of release. But within Angola itself, there is an even more restrictive area. A place separated from the general prison population. A unit designed specifically for prisoners sentenced to death. Louisiana's death row. Louisiana currently houses its death row inmates at Angola prison. For decades, the state maintained a separate execution facility. However, death row housing itself has long been located within the prison complex. The number of prisoners on Louisiana's death row has fluctuated over time. According to publicly available records, Louisiana has had between 60 and 90 prisoners on death row in recent decades. The exact number changes due to new death sentences, overturned convictions, deaths from illness, executions, However, executions in Louisiana have become increasingly rare. Legal challenges over execution methods have led to long delays. As a result, many death row prisoners remain incarcerated for 20 to 30 years or more while appeals move through the courts. Where death row inmates live. Angola's death row prisoners are typically housed in single cells inside a maximum security housing unit. The cells measure approximately 6 by 9 feet, though measurements can vary slightly depending on the specific tier. Inside each cell, prisoners usually have a metal bed frame, a thin mattress, a toilet and sink combination, limited personal property. Security is extremely strict. Prisoners are generally confined to their cells for 23 hours per day. They are escorted in restraints when leaving their cells. The 1 hour outside the cell is usually reserved for recreation, which may take place in small outdoor cages or enclosed yards. The level of isolation on death row has been the subject of legal and human rights debates, with some critics arguing that long-term isolation can have severe psychological effects. However, prison officials maintain that these restrictions are necessary for security. The wait for execution. One of the most striking realities of death row is how long prisoners wait. In the United States, the average time between sentencing and execution has increased dramatically over the past several decades. In Louisiana, it is not unusual for prisoners to remain on death row for 20 years or longer. Several factors contribute to this delay. The appeals process for death penalty cases is extremely complex. After sentencing, inmates typically file direct appeals, state post-conviction appeals, federal habeas corpus petitions. Each stage can take years to resolve. Courts review evidence, trial procedures, and constitutional issues. In some cases, new evidence emerges decades after the original conviction. As a result, executions can be delayed for many years. Some prisoners ultimately have their death sentences overturned. Others remain on death row until they die from natural causes. A place designed for finality. Executions in Louisiana have historically taken place at Angola. For many years, the state used electrocution. Later, Louisiana switched to lethal injection. However, legal disputes over lethal injection drugs have led to long periods where no executions have occurred. As of recent public reporting, Louisiana has gone many years without carrying out an execution, largely due to ongoing legal challenges regarding execution protocols. This has created a situation where prisoners remain on death row for extended periods, sometimes without a clear execution date. The future of executions in Louisiana remains uncertain, depending on legal rulings and changes in state policy. Daily life inside Angola's death row. Morning on death row. Morning begins early inside Angola's death row unit. Typically, lights turn on around 5 a.m. Though the exact time can vary slightly depending on institutional procedures and staffing. Correctional officers walk the tier performing security checks, confirming that each inmate is present and safe. Because prisoners are housed in single cells, each man spends the night alone. Unlike general population units where inmates may share dorms or two-person cells, death row housing is structured to maintain maximum control and separation. Shortly after morning security checks, officers begin delivering breakfast. Meals are usually passed through a small opening in the steel cell door known as a tray slot. Prisoners eat inside their cells. There is no communal dining area on death row. According to publicly documented prison procedures, meals generally consist of the same types of food served to the general prison population, although portions and menus are controlled by prison policy. Typical meals may include eggs or cereal for breakfast, sandwiches or hot meals for lunch, a hot entree for dinner. Food quality and portion size have occasionally been the subject of inmate complaints and legal filings, but prison officials state that meals are designed to meet nutritional standards required by correctional regulations. Security on the tier. Security inside Angola's death row housing unit is strict. Multiple layers of locked gates separate the tier from other parts of the prison. Movement inside the unit is tightly controlled. When inmates leave their cells, they are usually placed in handcuffs and sometimes leg restraints. According to publicly available correctional policies, at least one or more officers escort the prisoner during movement. This may occur for several reasons. Recreation time. Medical appointments. Legal visits. Showers. The purpose of these measures is to minimize the risk of violence or escape attempts. While incidents on death row are relatively uncommon compared to some other prison units, the severity of the prisoner's sentences leads correctional administrators to enforce maximum security protocols. Officers assigned to the death row tier undergo specialized training related to inmate supervision, use of force policies, emergency procedures, the 23-hour confinement. Most death row prisoners at Angola spend approximately 23 hours per day inside their cells. This level of confinement is sometimes referred to as administrative segregation or solitary confinement, although the terminology varies depending on prison classification systems. The 1 hour outside the cell is typically used for recreation. During recreation time, inmates may be escorted to a small outdoor cage or enclosed exercise yard. These recreation areas are often surrounded by tall chain-link fences, barbed or razor wire, concrete walls. Inmates usually exercise alone or with limited interaction depending on prison policy at the time. Activities during recreation may include walking in circles, doing push-ups or other bodyweight exercises, reading or writing if materials are allowed. Human rights organizations have criticized long-term solitary confinement in many prison systems. Some researchers argue that extended isolation can contribute to psychological stress. However, prison officials often state that strict separation is necessary for security and management of high-risk inmates. Showers and basic routines. Prisoners on Angola's death row generally shower several times per week, though schedules can vary based on staffing and operational procedures. When it is time for a shower, correctional officers escort the prisoner from his cell to a nearby shower area. Restraints are usually applied during movement. In many cases, prisoners shower individually rather than in group settings. After the shower is completed, the prisoner is escorted back to his cell. Other daily routines may include receiving mail, reading books, writing letters, legal research related to appeals. Mail delivery is an important part of daily life for many prisoners. Correspondence with family members, attorneys, or supporters can provide a rare connection to the outside world. However, incoming and outgoing mail is typically screened by prison staff for security reasons. Legal work and appeals. For many death row prisoners, a significant portion of their time is devoted to legal appeals. Capital punishment cases involve one of the most extensive appeals processes in the American legal system. After conviction and sentencing, defendants typically go through several stages of review. These can include direct appeal to the state Supreme Court, state post-conviction relief petitions, federal habeas corpus review, additional appeals if new evidence emerges. These processes often require extensive legal research and communication with attorneys. Some prisoners spend years studying case law and reviewing trial transcripts. Legal materials may be delivered to inmates through attorneys or prison libraries, though access can vary depending on prison policy. Because of the complexity of capital punishment cases, legal appeals can take decades to complete. In some cases, convictions have been overturned after courts discovered prosecutorial misconduct, withheld evidence, unreliable witness testimony. These cases highlight how the appeals system can sometimes change the outcome of death penalty sentences. Contact with family. For prisoners on death row, contact with family members is limited but not completely eliminated. Visitation policies have changed over time. Historically, many death row visits took place behind glass partitions, where prisoners and visitors communicate through telephones. Physical contact is generally restricted. Visits must be scheduled in advance and are subject to security screening procedures. Family members may travel long distances to see their relatives. Angola is located in a rural part of Louisiana, far from major cities. For some families, visiting can involve hours of travel. In addition to visits, prisoners may communicate through letters, approved phone calls, monitored electronic messaging systems, depending on policy changes. For some inmates, maintaining contact with family members becomes an important part of coping with long-term confinement. Religion on death row. Religious practice has long played a role in life at Angola prison. The facility has an extensive prison ministry program, and religious volunteers regularly visit the prison. Death row prisoners may request visits from chaplains or approved religious leaders. These visits can provide counseling, prayer, religious study materials. Prisoners from different religious backgrounds may request visits from leaders representing their own faith traditions. In some cases, religious advisors also play a role during the final hours before an execution, offering spiritual guidance if the prisoner requests it. Faith-based programs at Angola have been widely documented in journalism and academic studies. However, participation remains voluntary. The passage of time. One of the most difficult aspects of life on death row is the passage of time. Because prisoners remain in their cells for most of the day, daily routines rarely change. Days often follow a similar pattern. Meals. Brief recreation. Reading or writing. Waiting for mail or legal updates. Years can pass with little change in routine. Some prisoners develop strict personal schedules to structure their time. These routines may include daily exercise, reading large numbers of books, writing journals or essays, studying legal materials. For prisoners who remain on death row for decades, time becomes one of the defining elements of their experience. Some prisoners sentenced in the 1980s or 1990s remained on death row well into the 21st century while appeals continued through the courts. The final hours and the uncertain future of Angola's death row. The final hours before an execution. When an execution is scheduled in Louisiana, the process follows a strict and carefully documented protocol. In the final 24 hours, the prisoner is typically moved to a holding cell near the execution chamber at Louisiana State Penitentiary. Security around the facility increases significantly. Correctional officers, medical personnel, and legal representatives are placed on standby. During this period, the prisoner may receive visits from attorneys, family members, depending on policy, religious advisors or chaplains. The prisoner is also allowed to request a final meal, although states sometimes place limits on what can be requested. As the scheduled execution time approaches, witnesses gather in a designated viewing area. These witnesses often include members of the victim's family, media representatives, prison officials, legal observers. Louisiana historically carried out executions using lethal injection, after previously using electrocution. However, legal challenges involving lethal injection drugs have caused long delays. Because of these disputes, executions in Louisiana have become extremely rare in recent years, and the long-term future of the death penalty in the state remains uncertain. The uncertain future of death row. Today, Angola remains one of the most well-known prisons in the United States. It houses thousands of inmates, many serving life sentences. But the number of executions carried out in Louisiana has declined dramatically over the past 2 decades. Legal debates continue over execution methods, appeals processes, the fairness of capital punishment. Meanwhile, men on Angola's death row continue to wait. Some will continue fighting their convictions in court. Some may see their sentences overturned. Others may remain in their cells for decades. And a few may eventually face execution. Inside Angola's death row, time moves slowly, but the outcome of each case remains uncertain. Life on death row at Angola is shaped by long waits, strict isolation, and an uncertain future. For the men held there, every day becomes part of a countdown that may last decades. If you found this documentary informative, subscribe to the Inmate Diaries and support the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing real, well-researched stories from inside the world's most infamous prisons. And if there's another prison you want us to investigate next, let us know in the comments. Until next time, stay curious.